About 4 years ago, when I was 15 years old, me and my parents had moved into a brand new apartment, and we decided to get a puppy. We would walk him about 4 or 5 times a day, but we still struggled a lot with my dog separation anxiety. So I imagine for the first few weeks being there, it must have been hell for my neighbors, because he would always bark and cry whenever we left him all alone. However, every time we talked to my neighbors, they would just tell us not to worry about it because they hardly ever heard him, and everyone was fine with it. That is, except for Tony. One Saturday, I was home alone and someone knocked on my door. It was Tony. At first, he just seemed kind of somewhat surprised to see me open the door, but then he just smiled politely and then said,
"Hey, can you tell your parents to come see me when they get home, please?"
I said yes, and then he left. I thought nothing of it. When my parents came home, I told them about my encounter with Tony, and my dad went to his apartment, suspecting that it had something to do with my dog barking. Tony told my dad that my dog was a real barker, and that he worked during the night and needed to get sleep during the day, so he would really appreciate it if we could find a way to make less noise. Although he did say that he understood that he knows that it was hard to control a dog's bark. He also apologized for showing up at our door, saying that he didn't know I was alone in there. According to my dad, they had a pretty nice, polite conversation. My father had apologized for the inconvenience and then came home, and we did our absolute best to try and deal with my puppy's anxiety. And it worked. My dog, of course, did still bark, but wasn't so agitated as he used to be. Flash forward a few weeks. Every time my dog would sense Tony going down the stairs of our apartment building, my dog would always go nuts. He was a fairly friendly dog towards people, but for some reason, he just absolutely hated this guy. And Tony had stopped talking to us, pretty much ignoring us every time we ran into him, or he would simply just stare at us. One day, however, me and my mother came home, and on our apartment door were 6 holes. It was like someone had punched the door with like a key or something sharp. My mother was pretty naive about it. She thought that maybe we had done the damage ourselves throughout the months that we'd been there. That's when Martha, one of our other neighbors, then called my mother, really worried about me, then questioning her if I had been home alone during that afternoon. My mom said no, and that's when Martha tells us that someone had apparently been banging and kicking at our door while also screaming a ton of insults, making a scene that was so terrifying that her 11-year-old son got so scared that he hid under his bed for like 4 hours until Martha came home, because he thought someone was breaking into our house. A few weeks later, there was a city fair at night, and my parents and I, plus Martha and her family, headed out to the building to go to the fair. We came back earlier around 11 p.m. It was almost 12 a.m. at this point, and someone had rang our doorbell. My dad went to see who it was, but no one responded. Usually when this happens, we either go to the window to try and see who it is, or we go downstairs, because it's usually the mailman. But since it was midnight, my dad found it very strange, and he didn't go downstairs. He pretty much just ignored it, and we all went to bed. Well, the next morning, my mother runs into Martha, and she tells my mom that when they got back from the fair, they found Tony hidden in the dark under the stairs with a freaking baseball bat in his hands. He looked really nervous, but said someone had rang the doorbell, and he found it really weird that someone would do that so late at night. So he apparently came downstairs to see who it was, and with a baseball bat. My mom pretty much immediately knew exactly what happened. He had rang our doorbell expecting my dad to come downstairs and see who it was. I honestly don't really know if his plan was to attack my dad or not, but my father, obviously worrying about me and my mother's safety since he wasn't home during the week, then went upstairs absolutely fuming and knocked on Tony's door. When Tony saw my father, I kid you not, he looked like he was about to pass out. My father had confronted him, and Tony legit started crying. He told my dad that he sometimes did drugs and he really didn't know what he was doing. He then went on to apologize for actually damaging our door with a damn pocket knife, and for what happened the night before as well. He didn't even lie about it. As it turns out, the reason my dog freaked out every time he sensed him and barked so much was, well, because Tony waited until everyone in the building had left for work, and then he would go to my door and kick it, making my dog more furious every time, and not so much because of his anxiety. My dad then said very calmly, "This is the last time I'm going to talk to you. Next time you come near me or even look in the direction of my family again, I'm going to make my point very clear. Do you understand?" The guy kept crying and trying to hug my dad. We went to the police and filed a report, but we finally stopped seeing Tony. Turns out his wife actually kicked him out and filed a restraining order for her and their daughter, because apparently one morning she actually woke up with him staring at her and their daughter while they were sleeping, and the entire house smelled like gas because apparently he left the stove on. We moved shortly afterwards, and we never saw Tony again after that.